I mean, I labor Zionism is really like interesting to me because of the way that people try to synthesize like Marxism with Zionism and making socialism compatible with like settler colonialism, right? The continued like
Hmm.
occupation or not occupation colonialism of Palestine, and I don't know when people talk about Zionism. I found that they tend to discuss it as like more like kind of a monolithic political ideology that emerged like
Hmm.
coherently, you know. But there were different strains of thought within Zionism that fought to be dominant, right? I know like there was like the socialist Zionism of Nachman Syrkin. Is that if I'm pronouncing his name right? Who published the Jewish Question
Yeah, yeah, that's
and the
fine.
Socialist Jewish State, and he kind of juxtaposed like his version of Zionism against Theodore Herzl's, which is what he called bourgeois Zionism, right? So maybe could you take like a few minutes to talk about what labor Zionism is and how it emerged as a distinct political ideology, and you know what role did it play in Israel's nation building process?
Sure. So I guess to set the stage, there were to really simplify. There were really three approaches to the nationalist question that you, as a Jew, um, in the area where Zionism was kind of being created, as if you were a socialist Jew in the area where Zionism was created, like kind of Eastern Europe, Central Europe. Um, Option one was the Bundism, which is kind of a form of something that's not around anymore called
Mm-hmm.
Austro-Marxism, which was a basically a school of thought in terms of its relationship to the national question, where each of the nationalities of a large empire would form these sort of national coalitions and committees in that anybody could join if they wanted to or not join, and they would be responsible for kind of hashing out the national people's needs within a greater socialist state. Option two was to join the Bolsheviks, and the Russian revolutionary program that ended up coming to power. Said that they were for national liberation under what under Stalin's definition of the nation. And that essentially would leave Jews as kind of just assimilating to the higher Soviet culture. That would be I mean higher in their words. They would kind of abandon the Jewish religion, as everybody was expected to abandon religion in the under the Bolshevik program. And then there was Labor Zionism, which was, as you said, a fusion of Zionism and what we might call narrow nationalism, that essentially, in all of its different strands, and there are many different strands, advocated for a removal of the Jews from Europe and in all parts of the diaspora to settle into Palestine and to found there a socialist state. Um, and yeah, that's essentially the kind of your three options. And so there are a couple different kinds of socialist Zionism. I think like when I was reviewing for this episode, I kept going back to the work of Baron
Mm-hmm.
Borokhov, which I saw in the show notes. You were also checking
Yeah,
out
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Uh, and he found a party called Poale Zion, um, which is just like the workers of Zion. And he was a man that definitely did not agree with Austro-Marxism and was unwilling to accept the kind of assimilationist plan that the Bolsheviks had.
Yeah, his.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry,
yeah.
go for it.
I was just gonna say, I was reading a bit about Borokhov, and his, his plan was like quite interesting. So I was reading Zachary Lockman, who wrote an article about this in an edited volume, but he says, in Borokhov's view, the Jews were unassimilable and persecuted wherever they lived in the diaspora because of their abnormal social structure. They were overwhelmingly concentrated in the interstices and on the margins of national economic life, in petty trade, small-scale service enterprises, money lending, and the like, rather than in agricultural and basic industry. Unable to compete successfully in economies dominated by non-Jews and arousing anti-Semitism wherever they went, the petty bourgeois Jewish masses would ultimately inexorably be compelled to migrate to Palestine, the only territory in which they could successfully achieve economic normalcy by becoming wage workers in industry and agriculture. Here, this new normal Jewish proletariat would finally be able to wage the class struggle and achieve a Jewish socialist society. So he was basically saying that like the petty bourgeois Jewish people who were like migrating to Palestine from Europe would be sort of subordinated to a lower class position once they got to Palestine. They would be subordinated to a Jewish proletariat class, and because of that, they would be able to like catalyze class struggle and achieve socialist society through doing this. And from my understanding, that wasn't the case because, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these petty bourgeois Jewish people like migrated to Palestine, and they ended up competing for like Palestinians for these jobs in industry and agriculture, but they couldn't compete with them because Palestinian labor was just like on the whole cheaper, and also Palestinians were they were much more equipped and had more experience like working the land, whereas like these Jewish immigrants didn't they couldn't really do like the physical and manual labor that the Palestinians were much more accustomed to. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the case. Even if you were a Jewish farmer, the soil in Poland is very different in the care required than the soil in Palestine. But due to a variety of historical circumstances in Europe, from Jews being forbidden to own land, Jewish people were kind of forced into these positions of, like tradesmanship, mercantilism, if you were lucky. And stuff that didn't really lend itself well to making the desert bloom. So that's very right. That's you're correct. I will not correct you if you're wrong because you're not wrong.
So can you talk a little bit about like maybe like I don't know the genealogy, the evolution of labor Zionism, and maybe like Histadrut, and how did Histadrut like emerge from labor Zionism, and like what is Histadrut first of all?
The Histadrut is basically the all Israel like union, which was formed by a party called Achdut Ha'avodah, which basically just means like labor unity. That's the word. Yes, so that was basically this will come a little bit later, but like it was founded by we'll just say labor unity, so I don't have to keep embarrassing myself with my Hebrew. By David Ben Gurion, who is a hugely important figure in labor Zionism, who was originally a member of Poale Zion. But yeah, so keeping in mind like how we get from this like very fringe Zionist movement to the Histadrut, which was it was a huge labor organization that had essentially from like the Labor Unity Party had an army attached to it, the Haganah. because they were kind of in control. They were the biggest dogs in town. They were running the show, and they were able to issue orders to the Haganah. Which makes it a very interesting thing, because like if you told a leftist today, like imagine that there's one big union in a country
their own
that
military.
has an army that has their own military, and not to simplify it too much, but that was really the case, that they had their own military, and that people would go crazy. They'd be like, "That sounds awesome." But anyway, back to Ber Borochov. So yeah, very interesting figure. Shoot, I'm sorry. Remind me again of the name of the Zachary
Lachman.
Zachary Lachman. Zachary Lachman's book is very, very good. I would advise everybody to check it out. It's Comrades and Enemies, I think.
Comrades and Enemies. I know him because back when I was a Middle East Studies minor, I read a lot of his articles for class. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. But the one problem that I have with his analysis is that, truth be told, is that I think that he overestimates how important like Borokhovism was to the beginning of labor Zionism, which is not to say that most of the members who would go on to found the major labor Zionist formations in Israel after Borokhov's death were from the Polei Zion. But as like this guy Zev Sternhell puts it in his book, he's a little bit more of like he's like a big critic of the Palestinian conflict, as he calls it, but he's still a little bit more liberal. But what I like about his analysis is that he stresses that from the moment that like Ben Gurion landed as a member of Polei Zion in Israel, he knew that Borokhovism was going to be impossible, because for all of his weirdness, Borokhov, I think, truly did believe that he says that like Israeli and Arab relations must remain normal. He was not really for war, even if the things that he did, he had huge oversight in not realizing that they led to war, and or that they would lead to war. And Ben Gurion was a hugely important leader in that he recognized that the most important thing was not the transformation of Israeli society into a socialist society, but rather to strengthen the forces of production within Israel, to strengthen the nation at all costs. So almost immediately in Israel, the socialist program is not so much abandoned, but completely laid aside for the national program, which was created by socialist ends. It's almost as if so here, sorry, let me start over. He decided to put every single piece of Jewish property and power that he could towards building this nation, whether it was like petty bourgeois or like even capital, everything, as long as it was contributing to the nation, was good. And Zev Sternhell has this, he calls it nationalist socialism, is like the kind of unique thing that labor Zionism became. And it really wasn't anything like that in the world at the time. And, even like pretty soon, socialism starts to disappear completely from the meeting notes and like any like public talking about it. There's talk about the worker, but there's no talk about a proletariat. And it's not like a linguistic difference. You can say proletariat in Hebrew. But yeah, it's really kind of a shocking transformation. And this leads to him forming kind of a right-wing component to Polei Zion, and then forming Achdut HaAvodah in 1919. But yeah, that's kind of like the beginning of the story of labor Zionism. This is kind of like transformation into pretty much out and out nationalism. So really the boring answer is is that it wasn't so much that socialism was perverted in over like a long series of like revisionist reactionary moves. It's that pretty much as soon as the facts on the ground were kind of ascertained by the leadership of the labor Zionist formations, they decided to focus on what was most important to them, which was the building of an Israeli state at all costs.
Do you know